Ah, Perfect Dark. What a fun little N64 game that was. Rare definitely went above and beyond when it came to pushing the N64 to its limits to make this fun little first-person masterpiece. But did you know that there was actually a Game Boy game in the franchise as well? Yeah, well there is, and I think I'm gonna review it. Much like its N64 counterpart, Perfect Dark on the Game Boy Color pretty much did whatever it could to get the most out of the hardware that it was on. And I actually gotta say that I'm pretty impressed. Well, for the most part anyway, but we'll get into that later.
After your many years of study and training, this is the final test. Beyond this door is the Carrington Institute training ground.
I guess you could say that the story is kind of an alternate version of the N64 story. Once again, you assume the role of secret agent Joanna Dark. The game starts off with Joanna's final training examinations for the Carrington Institute. Once Jo passes all that with flying colors, and it's time for her first ever mission. Go to a South African jungle and take out a whole bunch of Datadyne cyborg production facilities. Oh boy. During the mission, Miss Dark will be in contact with none other than Daniel Carrington himself, as well as undercover agent Max Danger. Both of these dudes will be giving her useful and handy tips as she goes on to destroy the robots and take out the man behind them, Mink Hunter. A bunch of other things happen too, like infiltrating Datadyne headquarters and uploading information and getting captured on the Pelagic One and finding an alien spaceship and preventing the Institute from blowing up and some random thing about the Skidar, but if you know anything about the Perfect Dark story, then you would already know that this is not canon, so who cares? The gameplay here on the Game Boy Color is a bit different than on the Nintendo 64. Perfect Dark on the N64 was a first-person shooter. Here on the GBC, we've got ourselves a top-down third-person shooting perspective. There are pretty much 5 levels in the game. Joanna's training in the Institute, the South African jungle and cyborg production facilities, a Datadyne base near a crash site, the Pelagic One, and lastly, the Institute under Datadyne attack. Each one of these levels has a certain number of objectives that you need to complete in order to progress, from finding certain objects, to rescuing hostages, to taking out a certain number of enemies. There are a couple of minigame-like extra modes where you'll go into a first-person perspective, or into a 2.5D perspective, I guess you could say. Sometimes you'll be mowing down bad guys on a rail, sometimes you'll just be taking out targets in a range, and other times you'll be taking down a giant high-D helicopter. Oh, it does not just remind me of Metal Gear. Speaking of Metal Gear, many people like to compare the gameplay to this game to that of Metal Gear Solid Ghost Babel, also for the Game Boy Color. Although you can definitely tell that this one is trying to imitate it. The game can get a little bit tedious. Run around, cap some dudes, rescue a hostage, find some object, pick up a new weapon, repeat. Another thing worth noting is that the fact that the game actually isn't really that long. You'll probably be able to get through it in under 3 hours. And I mean, it is a portable game, but, you know, I've seen longer, I think. Oh, and before I forget, I should probably also say that this game should also hold a world record for world's most retarded AI ever. They basically go by 2 things: run around in a straight path, or run around in a circle. They sometimes seem as though they're locked to a specific room and will completely ignore you if you leave the area. Just look at me fuck with these stupid AIs. Owned, bitch! Controls are as follows. When in the third-person mode, use the directional pad to move Joanna around. Tap a direction twice to make her run, otherwise she'll walk. Pressing the A button will fire whatever weapon she has, and pressing B will reload that weapon. Pressing Start will bring up an inventory screen, and when you're next to a dead body, you can press Select to search the body, and Select again to pick up any items that you might find. When in the first-person mode, you can't actually move yourself. A log might move you on a set path, but that's pretty much it. So the directional pad becomes a crosshair that moves all across the screen. Once again, pressing A will fire, but for some reason you also have to shoot little R icons that pop up to reload. It's really weird and I don't get it, but oh well. Here's a favorite part of mine, a small little sniper section. It basically functions just like the other first-person shooting modes, except you're viewing it through a scope. And it looks pretty cool. You get to shoot dudes from a distance and birds as well. But the sniper rifle does suffer from what I like to call Metal Gear syndrome. You know, where it kind of randomly shakes over and over. Ah, damn, anyone got some Phantasmine? There are also a couple of vehicle chase scenes. Those are pretty easy to understand. D-pad moves, and A shoots a weapon if equipped. Then there's probably the most awkward one of them all. The 2.5D shooting sections, where you're usually fighting some kind of a helicopter, or octocopter. Helicoctopus. Or something, I don't know. But either way, these are a little bit awkward. Normally, you would press left and right to move Joanna around. You would push up or down, and the crosshair will move. If you hold down the B button, you'll be able to move the crosshair left and right. This can actually get a little weird sometimes, because, you know, the buttons are so close to each other. And your hands get bigger after a while, and stuff. The weapons in this game are pretty standard fare. You have Joanna's old standby, the Falcon 2, which is the only actual perfect dark weapon that actually came back with an exception of the rocket launcher. You also have a one-handed machine gun thingy, a shotgun, my personal favorite, and a rocket launcher. One very important thing to remember about the rockets and disruptor though, if you kill enemies with them, their bodies disappear, which means you can't search them. So, you know, be careful and stuff. One of the most impressive things about Perfect Dark on the GBC has got to be its presentation. It looks great considering that it's on a handheld miniature NES, basically. Sprite animations are fluid, environments are pretty detailed, and the animated blood is pretty good too. One of the things that impressed me the most, though, was the actual audio. The game actually forgoes having in-game music for using digital PCM samples. Yes, this game actually has sound effects that aren't just and stuff. I'll let you listen for yourself. The game also has a surprising amount of voiceovers as well. Joanna Dark and Daniel Carrington are both played by the same people who voiced the characters in the N64 game.
Mission successful, sir.
Very good. Anything to report?
Then there's Max Danger.
Max Danger.
Who sounds suspiciously like this guy.
I was tidying up one of your loose ends.
My loose ends.
Definitely isn't perfect though. My biggest gripe with the graphics is the lack of drawing distance. This makes areas seem claustrophobic and characters ridiculously big, and it also makes it more difficult to sneak up on enemies. Let's look at Ghost Babel again. That had a top-down view, except everyone looked a bit smaller. Now this wasn't a huge deal, and you can also see the entire area, which meant that you could actually plan ahead. And, you know, actually sneak around without getting messed up because you can only see a small portion of the screen. Awesome. Even with the pretty bad draw distance, it still looked and sounded great, considering that, you know, it's on the Game Boy Color. Perfect Dark originally came out on the N64 during the summer of 2000, and it was a smash hit. A Game Boy Color game would be released soon after. Oddly enough, the GBC game didn't do nearly as good as the N64 game, even though it had an incredibly kick-ass commercial. I mean, check this shit out.
Perfect Dark rated T for teen on Game Boy Color. Get into it!
The game was one of few games on the Game Boy Color, alongside Pokemon Pinball, to actually use a rumble feature. Basically, that means that it's a modified cartridge with a giant AAA battery-powered rumble pack. It ran off of its own AAA battery, which meant that it didn't actually draw power from the GBC. The game also had support for the N64 transfer pack. If you hooked up the Perfect Dark for the GBC to the N64, then you could actually unlock some of the more difficult to unlock cheats in the N64 game, including the Hurricane Fists, the Cloaking Device, the R-Tracker, and the ability to use any of the weapons in the single-player campaign, including the Psychosis Gun. Bitchin'. This game is pretty alright. It's got a remarkable presentation, and it tries to do a couple of cool things with the handheld system. but it's definitely not the kind of perfect Dark experience that I was originally expecting on the N64. Still, if you're a fan of the series and you want to see just exactly what the Game Boy Color can really do, then this is definitely something that you should check out sometime. It might not be perfect, but it's still pretty fun.